So welcome to everybody. I'm an e-learning developer here at Sauce Labs. I've been educating others about technology and writing code for over a decade, and I've launched Sauce School training with the aim to help make test automation accessible to all. This is going to be a presentation of beginning test automation. It's really designed for people who have limited to no experience with automated test code. What you're going to need to know, what we're covering today is also written down. So if you miss something, if you're not understanding something, you can follow along in the Selenium Java course. Part of the purpose of this is we can write some of the declarative step-by-step language in the page object. And it's easier to write our tests with less lines of code that just declare what we're doing. We're going to do login by using the login method. Whereas in login, the login page, you can define how that's done. This is sort of a main principle of object-oriented programming. You abstract things out with a well-known method. Doing this makes tests easier to maintain. Think about it. If you have a login page and you define a method called login with, let's say something on your page changes. Instead of having to go into every single page that interacts with it, you just go into that method that interacts with it and is used on many other pages. It's easier to maintain when you use a model like this. You keep one piece of functionality in one place, and that way, if you update it in one class, it takes effect in all of them. It makes it easier to write declarative language. When you go even deeper into the page object model, in this example, we have page objects and we have test objects. A little bit deeper, we have page objects and test objects. And then we create a base of each of these. The base page object contains logic that can be used in any of your pages. So this is an example with 2 different pages. Base test logic can be used in any of your other tests. So you would define a method like login, or you would define a method like walk to the park. Just be able to use that define method. So typically when you're doing this well, each set of page and test objects contain a base. They take care of functionality used by every page or test object. It makes for cleaner, more concise classes, and it's easier to understand and debug. So this base test functionality contains logic that all tests use. As an example, we would create base test. And in this base test, you might set variables such as a test name, session ID, driver. You define your variables in here. You also would put in your capabilities. Now, what capabilities are essentially a set of data that you might want to pass to somebody else. If you're interacting with a browser, this is data you might want to send to the browser. If you're interacting with Sauce Labs, this might be information that you want to pass to Sauce Labs. Some examples are your username and access key for the Sauce Labs platform, the name of the test platform. And when you're running tests, you can specify things like the browser name, the browser version, and the platform name. As you can see here, these use variables. A base test might also have the logic that sets up and instantiates a driver. The driver would use all of these capabilities when it's created. And it also has the teardown. And this is something that some people forget to do. When you're done using a driver and you run the test, it's important to quit and to close that driver out. So this is something else you'd want to put in a base test because you'd want to start and quit a driver for every single test that you run. Some other things that you might put in a base test, just this logic. A lot of test runners don't have very good ways built in for getting a pass-fail status. So in a lot of the libraries I've seen, you have to take and create the logic for, okay, this failed. How do we get this information? And, how do we send that information? So again, in a base test, every single test would want to know if it passed or failed. So you put it in the base test. It doesn't have to, but it can, essentially you would extend or inherit from the base test. So once you create your base test, you create another test like we did, and it would extend the base test. That means it has all the functionality, it has the capabilities, it starts the driver, tears down the driver, it passes the test information. If doing one of those things changed, all you'd have to do is change base test, and every single test that extended it would have its logic changed as well. So base page, just like the test has a base, test objects have a base page contains logic that define methods for all test pages. It'll use declarative language, which is complex and hard to read. What I mean by that, we define a method here, such as click. Click is actually a couple steps. You have to find something by the locator and then click it. Type, you'd have to get the input text, find the locator, and then send the input text in. But instead of having to type out, do these 4 things every time in your page, you just define the method type, and then you can use it. The harder to read things are put in here, and it creates methods that you're going to use over and over. Visit this page, find this thing, click, type. It's also a great location for complex error handling. One kind of funny thing that goes on with Selenium is if a test doesn't complete right, it'll throw you out of the test. And I mean, this happens in other languages, but it'll throw you out and it'll stop all of the tests. What you can do with that is something called error handling that SAS School goes into a little bit deeper. We're not going to touch on it tonight, but you can use statements that sort of catch some of those problems that might happen. As an example here, if it'll check to make sure your URL contains the beginning of a URL like it's supposed to. If for some reason someone were to forget to set this URL variable or put the URL in wrong, it would say, I'll use this other thing instead, so it doesn't kick you out of the whole test suite. So this is getting the URLs that the test will drive against. This is just a little bit closer look at some of these methods. So yeah, they locate and interact with elements using Selenium commands. This is another example of error handling. Another thing that can happen commonly with tests is that it doesn't wait long enough for what you need to have happen to happen. Sometimes it takes a little while for the test to load. What this does is it tells you essentially to wait until the locator on the page can be located, and then otherwise it'll throw an exception. The isDisplayed method that is defined here, it's a good place to add implicit waits, because if you add it in your test, this is a lot of complexity that's kind of hard to read when someone's saying, what is my test actually doing? Just like you extended base test, your page objects will extend the base page. As you can see here, now we can go in one of our page objects, and instead of having to type out all the steps for visiting, you just call the method and pass in the parameter of which app you're testing against. Instead of having to go through all the steps of having to type, and usually this includes locating the text box, clicking on the text box, and then typing certain things in the text box. That's 3 steps. We just write one thing, we're typing. And like you saw here, we use that isDisplayed, and that isDisplayed in the page object has some of that complexity and error handling. But all you really need to know when you're looking at what this test does is that it's checking if it is displayed and not exactly how it does that. When you use the base page, your page objects are easier to read, the page interaction logic, and we use these methods. So tonight, the first thing we're going to do is create a page object. So if you go into training.saucelabs.com, we're going to follow the directions in 3.03. We're going to do part 1 first. So part 1, you need to go and make sure the main folder is named tests. So as you can see here, you might have originally named it company name or something else. The test login that you created last time, this package should be named tests. If it's not, you can go to, you right click on it, refactor. It's important to refactor it because it'll go change the test name anywhere it's used and rename to tests. But if you did what we did last time, these two should already exist. After you create your new package, or after you make sure it's named tests, we're going to create a new package and name it page objects. So mine already exists here, but to create a new page objects package, right click, new package, and name it page objects. I'm going to just show you what it looks like. This is called page objects 2. It should show up in the same directory. I don't actually want that. So I'm going to go right click, delete, delete. Last but not least, we're going to create a new Java class, and this is our page object. So right-click in the page objects folder and create a login class. You guys can ignore this test. We kind of skipped over it. So essentially what yours should look like is this exists, create this, create a class, and then we can start with adding our logic or our code to that. All right, so where everybody should be is we have the test login from last time. It looks something like this, and your test package. We have a new package called page objects, and we have an empty class right now. What you need to do is you're going to actually have to go to training.saucelabs.com, module 3.03 for Java. You can copy this, it doesn't matter because it's commented out. Copy everything in here and paste it into login.java. I think the reason it's gray is that it's not being used anywhere. So I haven't started using my class called login yet. But let's take a look at what this is actually doing. So the login class creates variables very descriptively. Username locator describes, this is on our page, the locator, the ID of the username field. Password locator is the ID on our page of the password field. Submit button locates our button. And success message locator locates this. And why don't I show you real quick what all those things are. So these variables locate the username field, the password field, because our ID is password. Our submit button. And it's also a locator for, this is something that we're looking for at the end. So our last variable actually defines this. We're looking for flash success. It creates the login method, which is to me a little confusing. I hate it when things are named exactly the same, the class, and then we have a method. You know, it starts up a driver. Driver gets the internet.herokuapp.com/login, so our web page that we're testing. Then it has that imperative language. Driver, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. It's actually doing 6 different things and abstracting it into a class called with. And then the last thing is sort of what we're going to be using for our assertion. It's saying, is the success message present? It looks for the success message locator called flash success. Looks for this. And it checks that it is displayed. The next step that you're going to need to do is going to be updating test login to use it. So we're still on 3.03. Now that we have this, we don't need all of the code in your test login page. You don't need this. We have a lot of extra stuff right here. If you notice, these things are being done in this method here. So first step, copy paste. Second step, we're going to update some things. We're going to update testlogin.java to use login. First thing you need to make sure, if it doesn't auto import, make sure you have the by class imported in login.java. It should just come with a copy paste. When we replace things, we're no longer going to be using it. Our new imports list will look like this. And notice this right here. What this is doing is it's importing this class. It's saying, look in the page objects directory, look for login, import it. We're also using assert true for our test, but I don't think that's new. We're also going to instantiate a instance of login. So under where your driver is created in test login, you're going to create a new lowercase login. I'm going to create a login. You're going to start where you're going to use the driver with a login instance. So in the before method, you're going to use this login and create a new one. Last but not least, we're going to change all of our code. All of this imperative language that you have right here is going to simply be replaced with this. So if you're looking at your test code, gross, this is super imperative language. Let's get rid of it. It's too complicated. Simply replace it with this. I guess I still do need the by class. Is that accurate? No, it's not. Okay, we actually don't need that anymore because we also created success message present. So I'm going to undo that. I don't need the by class. You're also going to change your assertion statement slightly. So instead of having, again, this imperative language that tells you all the steps, we're just going to use this that has the steps for you. So your new test login is going to look like, your new assertion is going to look like that. Now we've taken all of this imperative language and made it declarative. Our succeeded method is much more simple to read. Essentially, your job is to follow the steps in part 2. So we've created a page object and a test object. We've taken some of the logic out of the test object so it's easier to read. So we took all this out, much easier to read. And right here, we added the login, and this is all the actual login is taken care of right here. It gets your driver. And it has your driver get the app you're going to test against. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a second test. If you look at our app, notice we have to go to 2 pages. So we do our login, hit login, you should see a success message present. Well, you want to know in your test if the reason your test is failing. So say you wanted to log in and then go to the shopping cart. Your test could fail on the when it tries to go to the shopping cart. It could be for 2 reasons. It could be because you didn't log in right, or it could be because the shopping cart isn't working. What we want to do in our test is add something to make sure we catch the situation where we didn't log in right. So, for example, my login is Tom Smith, but instead of typing in the correct password, I type in bad space password. It takes us to a different page, and we have something new that shows up. This is called flash error. What you're going to do is we're going to add a new test on there. It's called, it can be considered error handling. So the first thing you need to do is create a new failure message locator. Just like we had a locator for the green success message, we want to have a locator for the failure message. So we'll define this new variable. You can just copy and paste it from the platform. Failure message locator. It's gray because it's not being used yet. Okay, we have a locator for that red banner. Let's use it. We're going to create a new method to locate it, our imperative language. So we have the success message present, checks for the green success message. The failure method present will check for flash error. So we have some of our imperative things defined in our page object. It's called a page object because it handles interacting with the page. The last step here is to add the actual test. So there's 3 things you need to add: variable, method, and login. Ooh, that's wrong. It should be in login. And last but not least, we're going to add a test method at the very bottom. Actually, it should go in between your test method and your after method. So as you can see here, it does the same thing I just did. It checks to let you know our test failed because we were on a failed login page. One thing that can be kind of confusing is, well, why didn't I just check that the green banner wasn't there? Why didn't I check that flash success wasn't there? Selenium doesn't work like that. If it can't find an actual thing to locate, you can't check that it isn't there because it'll throw an exception and your test will just stop running. So for last part of tonight, add these 3 things in. This is incorrect. It should just be login.java. So 2 things into login.java. And a new test annotation with a method called failed. If everything goes as planned, you should see 2 tests run this time. There we go. So you can see there should be 2 browsers opening up. One was good and one was bad. But the test didn't fail because what it was looking for was a failure message. I don't want to try to go too much further tonight, but I do want to kind of show you some of the other things that are included in Sauce School. So if you guys are still kind of confused, again, at the end of each little section, I try to put images that show you, okay, these are the things that were added into your test. If you keep going in this module, the next thing that you do is add some extra checks, add some extra error handling. What else could possibly go wrong with this that would cause a test failure? Well, another thing that could possibly go wrong is that you're not actually on the login page when you start your test. Maybe the URL for it changed. Maybe something else changed. If you just get an error that the login test isn't working, sometimes it's hard to know why. And that's another possible reason. So the next thing that you would add in is just a check before you even run your tests. It's going to do a check. Are we actually on this page? And you check if you're on this page to see if this login button is actually here. So you add a little something in, you add a new method in there. And then it goes a little bit deeper into that page object model that we talked about a little bit. Currently, all you have is one page object and one test object. Well, we're going to create a base page, like we said, that has features that any page object might want to use. So it walks through, okay, we're creating this base page. Then you have your login test extend the base page. So login extends base, that sort of thing. And then a little bit, even a little bit more error handling. No such element exception is something that somebody was telling me they had a problem with. It just means that it can't find something on the page. Now, if one test can't find something on the page, it doesn't mean you want the rest of your tests to stop running. So if you use error handling, it won't exit your whole test suite. It'll just give you that error. Goes a little bit into waits. Another reason your test could fail is that it tries to load the page and it starts checking for things before the page is loaded. So the next section talks a little bit about explicit waits and that sort of thing.